My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I still remember the sting of those words like it was yesterday. Sarah, my boss, Mr. Henderson, said, his voice dripping with that fake sympathy he always used, about the company retreat to Napa Valley. Well, there just isn't enough budget this year for everyone, and unfortunately, your name didn't make the cut. He said it so casually, like he was telling me the coffee machine was out of order. Not that I, the senior analyst who'd practically lived in the office for the past 6 months to close the biggest deal in our department's history, was being excluded from a reward supposedly for the entire team's hard work. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Not enough budget? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, though inside a storm was brewing. My stomach churned. I'd seen the preliminary list accidentally left on the printer earlier that week. Mark, the intern who mostly fetched coffee and was still learning the difference between a spreadsheet and a slide deck, was on it. So was Jessica, Henderson's personal favorite, who spent more time planning her weekends and gossiping by the water cooler than actually contributing to any meaningful project. But me? The one who'd salvaged the quarterly reports when our system crashed? The one who'd mentored 3 new hires without any extra compensation or recognition? The one who'd consistently exceeded every single target set for me, often carrying the weight of others? Apparently, my contribution wasn't budget-worthy. The humiliation was a physical ache settling deep in my chest. It wasn't just about a trip to Napa, as lovely as that sounded. It was about the blatant disrespect, the clear, undeniable message that my efforts, my dedication, my late nights and sacrificed weekends were invisible. Or worse, intentionally ignored, deemed less valuable than office politics and favoritism. He just shrugged, a dismissive little gesture that made my blood boil. Tough decision, Sarah. You know how it is. Maybe next year? Next year. As if I was some child being placated with a vague, empty promise he had no intention of keeping. I stood there, in his ridiculously oversized plush office, feeling smaller than I ever had in my professional life. For a moment, I just wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But as I turned and walked out, that feeling of smallness, of being utterly dismissed, began to curdle into something else, something harder, sharper. A cold, quiet resolve started to solidify in its place. He thought he could just brush me aside, undervalue me, make me feel insignificant, and I'd just take it, smile politely and say, "Thank you for the opportunity." Oh, he had no idea what was coming. He thought he knew about budget constraints and making tough decisions. I was about to give him, and the entire company, a masterclass in consequences. They all thought they had me figured out. The quiet, hard-working Sarah. The one who never complained, the one who just put her head down and did the work. They were about to learn that quiet doesn't mean weak, and hardworking doesn't mean you can walk all over me. Have you ever been made to feel completely invisible or undervalued at work, despite pouring your heart and soul into your job? Share your story in the comments below. Let's show each other we're not alone in these fights and that our worth isn't determined by someone else's biased judgment. And hey, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe because you won't want to miss how this particular story of budget constraints unfolds. Trust me, the ending is priceless. The Napa Valley incident wasn't an isolated storm. It was the hurricane that finally made landfall after years of brewing in a toxic atmosphere. Looking back, the signs were all there, red flags I'd either naively ignored or been conditioned to accept as just the way things are. It's funny, or rather, incredibly frustrating, how you can be drowning slowly and not even realize it until the water is up to your chin. It started subtly, as these things often do. I remember about 2 years ago, I poured weeks, no months of my life into developing a new data analysis model. This wasn't just some tweak to an existing spreadsheet. It was a completely new framework. Something I believed could genuinely revolutionize how we identified and targeted potential high-value clients. I spent countless late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and the sheer excitement of creation, cross-referencing datasets, building algorithms, testing and retesting. When I finally presented it in a departmental meeting, my heart was pounding with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Mr. Henderson listened, his face impassive, occasionally glancing at his watch. He asked a few cursory questions, the kind that told me he hadn't really grasped the depth of it, and then said, "Interesting, Sarah. Very detailed. We'll take it under advisement. Just like that. Dismissed with a verbal pat on the head. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I told myself, he's busy. He'll see the value later. 2 months later, at the quarterly stakeholders meeting, the big one, with executives from head office, Mr. Henderson took the stage. He began to speak about a groundbreaking new efficiency model his department had developed. As he clicked through the slides, my blood ran cold. It was my model. My charts, my logic, my projected outcomes, even some of my exact phrasing, just with his name splashed across the bottom of every slide as lead strategist. The applause when he finished was deafening. He beamed, accepting the congratulations, even getting a hefty bonus for his innovative thinking that quarter. I sat in the back row, invisible, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. A wave of nausea washed over me. What could I possibly do? Stand up and accuse the head of department, a man known for his connections, in front of the entire company leadership? I was just an analyst. He was Mr. Henderson, the golden boy who could do no wrong. The bitterness of that moment, the sheer audacity of his theft, stayed with me, a cold ember in my gut. Then there was the promotion I was absolutely certain I was going to get. Senior lead analyst. I'd been performing at that level for over a year, unofficially, of course. I'd mentored new team members, led complex projects solo, and consistently exceeded every performance metric. I'd even prepared a detailed presentation for my interview, outlining my achievements and my vision for the role. But the position went to David Reynolds. David, who'd been with the company 6 months less than me, whose analytical skills were, to put it mildly, rudimentary, and whose main contribution to team meetings was to loudly agree with whatever Henderson said. When I finally got the courage to ask Henderson for feedback, he hemmed and hawed, avoiding eye contact, before finally landing on, "Well, Sarah, David just has stronger leadership potential. And frankly, you need to be more assertive in group settings, project more confidence." More assertive? I was the one who had to diplomatically point out David's glaring errors in his reports before they went to clients, saving him from embarrassment time and time again. I was the one who stayed late to redo sections of his work so the team wouldn't miss deadlines. But David played golf with Henderson on Saturdays. David was part of the inner circle. I, apparently, was just the workhorse. And oh, how Henderson loved to play the team player card, especially with me. It was his go-to phrase for piling on more work. "Sarah, could you just help Mark out with this client analysis? He's really struggling, and you're so good with the numbers." Mark, the perpetual intern who somehow managed to get a permanent position despite still needing someone to explain how to use the pivot table function every other week. Or, "Sarah, Jessica's a bit overwhelmed with organizing the charity bake sale this month. Could you take over the Miller account presentation for her? You're such a lifesaver, truly." Jessica, Henderson's niece, a fact everyone knew but no one spoke about. Her desk was a testament to online shopping, and her work mostly consisted of lengthy personal calls and planning her elaborate weekend getaways. My workload ballooned. I was effectively doing my job and significant portions of at least 2 other people's jobs. But my title remained the same. My pay remained the same. The recognition? Non-existent, unless you count the patronizing "Attagirl Sarah" when I managed to pull yet another rabbit out of a hat at the 11th hour. I kept telling myself, be patient. Hard work and dedication will eventually be seen. It has to be. I was so naive, so desperate to believe in the meritocracy I thought this company stood for. It wasn't just the big betrayals. It was the daily, insidious drip feed of disrespect, the microaggressions that wore me down bit by bit. In strategy meetings, I'd offer a well-researched suggestion, only for it to be met with polite silence or a dismissive nod. Then, 5 minutes later, a male colleague, often David or even Henderson himself, would rephrase my exact idea, sometimes almost word for word, and suddenly it was brilliant, insightful, exactly what we need to do. I'd often be the most senior analyst in a room, yet invariably, if someone needed notes taken, all eyes would turn to me. Henderson had a charming habit of calling me kiddo or sweetheart in front of clients, especially when I was trying to explain a complex financial model. "Good job, Sarah, keeping all those complicated numbers straight for us," he'd say with a chuckle, as if I were a precocious child showing off a party trick, not a seasoned professional delivering critical business intelligence. Each instance felt like a tiny paper cut. Insignificant on its own, perhaps, but collectively, they were bleeding me dry. And the annual performance reviews? They were a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. My performance metrics were undeniable. Projects completed on time and under budget, client satisfaction scores through the roof, innovative solutions implemented that saved the company tangible money. Yet, my reviews were consistently average. "Sarah is a diligent and reliable member of the team," one read, "but needs to improve her visibility within the wider organization and develop her executive presence." Another suggested I focus on strategic networking. Translation: "You do great work, but you're not one of us. You don't play the game, so we can't possibly acknowledge your true value." Meanwhile, Jessica, whose most significant contribution that year was color-coding the office recycling bins, would receive glowing reviews praising her infectious positive attitude and her remarkable ability to foster team cohesion. It was a joke, a cruel, soul-crushing joke. The exclusion from the Napa retreat wasn't the first nail in the coffin of my loyalty to this company, not by a long shot. It was simply the final, heaviest blow from Henderson's hammer, the one that made it unequivocally clear that my hard work meant nothing, my contributions were invisible, and my worth, in their eyes, was negligible. It was the insult that finally shattered the illusion that if I just worked harder, if I was just more patient, things would change. They wouldn't, not unless I changed them myself. In that bleak landscape of corporate indifference, there was one, just one, unexpected beacon of light. His name was Arthur Peterson, the CEO of Peterson Innovations, one of our largest and most demanding clients. He was the kind of client who made most of our senior management, including Henderson, sweat. He was sharp, no nonsense, and had an uncanny ability to see through corporate fluff in seconds. I was initially assigned to his account because, frankly, everyone else had fumbled it. David had nearly lost them with a series of glaring errors in a crucial market projection. And even Henderson seemed a bit out of his depth with Peterson's incisive questions and his refusal to accept vague answers. I remember my first big presentation to Mr. Peterson and his team. I'd spent weeks buried in data, not just our internal numbers but industry trends, competitor analysis, macroeconomic indicators, the whole 9 yards. I walked into that boardroom, heart pounding, expecting the usual dismissiveness or, at best, polite indifference I'd grown accustomed to from my own superiors. But Mr. Peterson was different. He was an older gentleman, probably in his late 60s, with a presence that commanded the room without him even raising his voice. He had these incredibly astute eyes that seemed to absorb everything. He listened, truly listened, as I laid out my analysis and projections for his company. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone. When I finished, he didn't just nod and move on. He asked questions. Deep, thoughtful questions that showed he'd understood the nuances of my report. He challenged some of my assumptions, not in an aggressive way, but in a way that pushed me to defend my reasoning, to articulate my thought process more clearly. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my brain was actually being engaged, respected. After that meeting, something shifted. Mr. Peterson started specifically requesting that I, Sarah Miller, be the lead analyst on all projects related to Peterson Innovations. I remember Henderson looking slightly put out the first time Peterson's office called and asked for me directly, bypassing the usual chain of command. "Sarah," Mr. Peterson would say in his calm, gravelly voice during our calls, "your insights on the Q3 strategic alignment were spot on. You have a clarity of thought that's refreshing, young lady." Young lady, from him, felt like a term of endearment and respect, not the patronizing diminutive Henderson favored. He once told Henderson, right in front of me during a conference call, after I'd successfully navigated a particularly complex data challenge for his company, "Henderson, you've got a real gem in Ms. Miller. Her work on this latest project has saved us, and by extension you, a considerable amount of potential trouble. Make sure you're taking good care of her." Henderson just gave that oily, insincere smile of his and replied, "Oh yes, Arthur. Sarah's a good, solid worker. Very diligent." He completely downplayed it, as usual, probably irked that a client was praising me, his subordinate, so directly. But I saw the look Mr. Peterson gave him, a brief, almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes that told me he saw right through Henderson, too. Mr. Peterson never offered me a job at his company, though sometimes, in his own subtle way, I sensed he was gauging my career satisfaction, or lack thereof. He'd ask things like, "Are they keeping you challenged enough over there, Sarah?" Or, "Do you feel your talents are being fully utilized?" But what he did offer was far more critical at that juncture in my career. He consistently and unequivocally validated my competence. He saw my worth when my own boss was either too blind, too biased, or too threatened to acknowledge it. His respect, his genuine appreciation for the quality of my mind and my work, became a quiet, steadying force. It was like a lighthouse beam cutting through the fog of self-doubt that Henderson and the office culture constantly tried to envelop me in. Knowing that someone of his stature, someone whose opinion actually mattered in the business world, believed in me, helped me keep that ember of defiance and self-worth alive, even when I felt like I was drowning in injustice. He didn't know it then, but Arthur Peterson, this unexpected ally, was one of the critical reasons I started to seriously consider that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to just endure this toxic environment. Maybe I could find a way to rise above it, on my own terms. His belief in me planted a seed. If he saw this value in me, perhaps others would too. Perhaps I needed to start seeing it more clearly in myself and acting accordingly. The Napa Valley snub, combined with Mr. Peterson's quiet encouragement, was the catalyst. It wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about strategy. While Henderson and his favorites were busy patting themselves on the back and, I presumed, planning their wine-tasting outfits, I was channeling all that frustration, all that accumulated injustice, into a meticulously crafted plan. My silent rise, as I came to think of it, began not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a mouse and the soft hum of my laptop late into the night, long after the office lights were out. First, I started documenting everything. Every stolen idea, every dismissive comment, every instance where my work was either undervalued or outright plagiarized. I compiled emails, meeting minutes, or my own detailed notes when official ones were conveniently vague, performance reviews, and project timelines. It was a grim task, reliving those moments of humiliation and disrespect, but with each entry, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just for me. This was for anyone who'd ever been made to feel small in a place where they poured their heart and soul. Then, I focused on what I could control, my skills and my network, but this time, for my benefit, not the company's, and certainly not Henderson's. I'd always loved the analytical side of my job, the part where I could deep dive into complex data and unearth insights that others missed. So, I took it further. I enrolled in advanced online courses in data science and financial modeling, specializing in niche areas that I knew were becoming increasingly valuable in our industry. My evenings and weekends, once spent catching up on work Henderson had dumped on me or trying to fix David's mistakes, were now filled with lectures, coding assignments, and virtual study groups with professionals from around the globe. I was exhausted, yes, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. The satisfying ache of building something, of investing in myself. I also started subtly, very subtly, cultivating relationships outside of my immediate department. I'd offer to help colleagues in other divisions with data analysis on cross-functional projects, always making sure my contributions were both valuable and visible to their managers. I attended industry webinars and virtual conferences, not just passively listening, but actively participating, asking intelligent questions, and connecting with speakers and other attendees on professional networking platforms. I wasn't looking for a new job, not yet. I was building a reputation, a safety net, and a portfolio of achievements that were undeniably my own, untainted by Henderson's shadow. The most significant part of my silent rise, however, was a project I started working on in complete secrecy. Remember that revolutionary data analysis model Henderson had stolen from me 2 years prior? The one he'd passed off as his own? Well, I hadn't forgotten it, and I knew, with the new skills I was acquiring, I could make it even better, more powerful, more indispensable. So, in the quiet of my apartment, I began to rebuild it from the ground up, incorporating advanced machine learning algorithms and predictive analytics that were light years ahead of what Henderson had presented. I called it Project Phoenix because I intended for it, and for my career, to rise from the ashes of his deceit. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about creating something so undeniably brilliant, so demonstrably superior that its value would be irrefutable. While Henderson was busy delegating his work to me, assuming I was just the same compliant Sarah, I was meticulously gathering evidence of his incompetence and my own uncredited contributions. For instance, when he'd forward me a complex client request with a vague, "Sarah, handle this," I'd not only handle it flawlessly, but I'd keep a meticulous record of the original request, my detailed solution, and the positive client feedback that invariably followed. Feedback that Henderson would then present as his own success in team meetings. He thought he was being clever, using me as his workhorse. He had no idea he was actually helping me build my case, brick by painstaking brick. I became a master of quiet observation. I noted who in the company actually held influence, who valued genuine competence over sycophancy. I paid attention to the undercurrents, the hushed conversations about upcoming strategic shifts or potential new high-stakes clients. All this information was filed away, pieces of a larger puzzle I was slowly assembling. It was a lonely path at times. There was no one I could confide in at work, no one who would understand the sheer audacity of what I was planning. But every time I felt a pang of doubt, I'd remember Henderson's smug dismissal, the casual cruelty of the Napa Valley decision, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. And then I'd look at the glowing feedback from Mr. Peterson, or the complex algorithm I'd just successfully debugged for Project Phoenix, and a cold, determined calm would settle over me. They thought I was just treading water, barely keeping my head above the surface. They had no idea I was secretly building a submarine. If this story of quiet resilience and strategic planning is resonating with you, or if you've ever had to build your own Project Phoenix to reclaim your worth, let me know in the comments. And if you believe in the power of a well-played long game, give this video a like. It really helps support the channel and encourages me to share more stories like this. The day of reckoning arrived about 6 months after the Napa Valley incident. It was the annual company-wide strategy summit, a lavish affair held in a downtown hotel ballroom. All the executives were there, department heads, key stakeholders, and of course Mr. Henderson, preening like a peacock, clearly anticipating another round of accolades. He was scheduled to give the keynote presentation on future-proofing our market share, a topic I knew he'd barely researched himself. He'd, of course, delegated the nitty-gritty data crunching to me, which I'd delivered, as always, flawlessly, though I'd kept the truly groundbreaking insights for myself. The atmosphere was a mixture of forced corporate enthusiasm and underlying tension. I sat towards the back, a deliberate choice, dressed not in my usual muted office attire, but in a sharp, impeccably tailored power suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. My heart was a hummingbird in my chest, but outwardly I projected an air of calm I didn't entirely feel. I had my meticulously prepared notes, my evidence and Project Phoenix, now fully developed and tested, ready to deploy. Henderson took the stage to polite applause. He launched into his presentation with his usual blend of overconfidence and superficial charm. He talked about synergy and leveraging core competencies, and all the other buzzwords he loved. He even had the gall to present a watered-down version of some of my old analytical frameworks as new departmental initiatives. I watched him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. He was walking right into it. Then came the Q&A session. This was my moment. As Henderson basked in the lukewarm questions from a few pre-selected sycophants, I saw Mr. Peterson, who was in the front row as a key client representative, subtly catch my eye and give a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. When there was a lull, I raised my hand. Henderson, spotting me, looked momentarily surprised, then a condescending smirk flickered across his face. "Ah, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. "Got a question for your old boss?" Keeping it simple for us, I hope? A few of his cronies chuckled. I stood up, my voice clear and steady, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. Actually, Mr. Henderson, it's more of an observation, and perhaps a proposal. You speak of future-proofing our market share, which is vital. However, the models you've presented, while familiar, are based on somewhat outdated analytical principles. For instance, the client segmentation strategy you just outlined doesn't account for recent shifts in consumer behavior driven by emerging digital platforms, potentially leaving us vulnerable to more agile competitors. A ripple of surprise went through the room. You could hear a pin drop. Henderson's smile faltered. "Well, Sarah," he stammered, clearly flustered, "these models have served us well. We can't just abandon proven methods." "With all due respect, sir," I interjected, my voice still calm but now carrying an undeniable edge of authority. "Serving us well, in the past, doesn't guarantee future success. In fact, relying on outdated methods is precisely how companies lose market share. For the past 6 months, in my own time, I've been developing a new predictive analytics platform, Project Phoenix, which utilizes machine learning to provide far more granular and dynamic market insights. It has already identified 3 emerging high-value client segments your current model completely misses, segments that represent a potential 15% increase in revenue within the next fiscal year. I saw Henderson's face go pale. His eyes darted nervously towards the CEO, Mr. Davies, who was now leaning forward, his expression intent. "Furthermore," I continued, "Project Phoenix also includes a proprietary risk assessment algorithm that can identify potential client churn with 92% accuracy, something our current system struggles to achieve even 60% on. This isn't just theory, Mr. Henderson. I have the data, I have the working model, and as it happens, I've already demonstrated its efficacy to one of our key clients." At this point, Mr. Peterson stood up. "That's correct," he announced, his voice resonating through the silent ballroom. "Ms. Miller presented an early version of Project Phoenix to Peterson Innovations 3 months ago. Its insights were so compelling, so demonstrably superior to what we were currently receiving, that we based our entire Q4 strategic investment plan on her projections. And I can tell you, the initial results are exceeding all expectations. Frankly, it's the most impressive piece of strategic analysis I've seen in my 40 years in this business." The collective gasp in the room was almost comical. Henderson looked like he'd been slapped. His face was a mottled red and white. David Reynolds, sitting near him, looked like he was about to be sick. Jessica was staring, mouth agape, her usually perfect makeup suddenly looking garish. Mr. Davies, the CEO, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Ms. Miller, this is quite a revelation. Why haven't we heard about this Project Phoenix before?" I met his gaze directly. "Because, Mr. Davies, historically, innovative ideas from certain quarters in Mr. Henderson's department have either been dismissed or reappropriated without credit." I let that hang in the air for a moment, the implication clear. I felt it was crucial to fully develop and validate Project Phoenix independently to ensure its integrity and demonstrate its undeniable value. I also have extensive documentation regarding the creative inspiration for some of Mr. Henderson's past innovations, should that be of interest. The look of pure, unadulterated shock and dawning horror on Henderson's face was something I will treasure for the rest of my life. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, sputtering like a beached fish. The power dynamic in that room had shifted so seismically, it was almost a physical force. The smugness, the arrogance, the casual dismissal he had shown me for years had all been stripped away in a matter of minutes, replaced by a raw public humiliation. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was just a man exposed. Mr. Davies looked from me to Henderson, then back to me, a slow, calculating expression on his face. "Ms. Miller," he said, "I think you and I, and perhaps Mr. Peterson, need to have a private discussion. Immediately." As I walked towards the front of the ballroom, past a stunned and silent audience, past a visibly deflated Henderson who couldn't even meet my eye, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just triumph, it was vindication. It was the empowering realization that I had taken back my narrative, my value, my voice. The budget might not have been there for me to go to Napa, but I had just created something far more valuable, and in doing so, I'd ensured Henderson would be paying a price far steeper than a retreat ticket. The private meeting with Mr. Davies and Mr. Peterson was less of a discussion and more of a coronation, albeit a quiet and intensely focused one. I laid out Project Phoenix in detail, showed them the back-end data, the algorithms, and the projected ROI, which was, even by my conservative estimates, substantial. Mr. Peterson, bless his supportive soul, corroborated everything, adding specific examples of how my insights were already benefiting his company. Mr. Davies listened intently, his initial surprise giving way to a shrewd, calculating look. He asked pointed questions, not to challenge me, but to understand the full scope and potential. He was a businessman, first and foremost, and he recognized value when he saw it. The fallout for Henderson was swift and brutal, though handled with corporate discretion, of course. There was no public firing squad, but within a week, an internal memo announced that Mr. Henderson was pursuing other opportunities. The euphemism was so transparent, it was almost insulting. He was gone, vanished from the plush office, his nameplate removed, his legacy of stolen ideas and cultivated favoritism evaporating like morning mist. I heard through the grapevine that the documentation I'd alluded to regarding his past innovations had been thoroughly reviewed by HR and legal. Apparently, my meticulously kept records painted a very clear picture of intellectual property theft and managerial incompetence. He didn't even get a golden parachute. His exit was reportedly quite unceremonious. As for David Reynolds, his strong leadership potential seemed to deflate overnight without Henderson to prop him up. He suddenly became very quiet in meetings, his contributions dwindling to nervous nods. He tried once to offer me a fumbling, awkward apology about how things had been. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable, and said, "I appreciate you acknowledging it, David. Moving forward, I expect professionalism and competence from everyone on my team." The unspoken "or else" hung heavy in the air. He got the message. He was eventually reassigned to a different department in a significantly less prestigious role. Good riddance. Jessica, Henderson's niece, was a slightly different story. Without her uncle's protection, her lack of actual skills became glaringly obvious. She tried to buddy up to me, offering insincere compliments and feigning interest in my work. "Sarah, you're just so brilliant. Maybe you could show me how that Phoenix thingy works sometime?" She'd gush, her eyes wide with fake admiration. I'd just smile politely and delegate her tasks that were actually within her very limited capabilities, like organizing files or, ironically, fetching coffee. The power dynamic had completely flipped. She eventually resigned, citing a desire to explore her creative passions, which I suspect translated to finding another relative to mooch off. The most significant change, of course, was for me. Mr. Davies didn't just offer me a promotion, he created a new position for me, Director of Strategic Analytics and Innovation. I was given my own team, a significant budget, no more not enough budget excuses for me, and a direct line to the CEO. Project Phoenix became the company's flagship analytical tool, and I was tasked with integrating its principles across all departments. The very ideas Henderson had dismissed or stolen were now the cornerstone of the company's future strategy, and I was the one leading the charge. My new office was on the executive floor, larger than Henderson's old one, with a better view. But more important than the physical trappings was the respect. People listened when I spoke. My ideas were not just heard, but actively sought out. Colleagues who had once ignored me or talked down to me now approached me for advice, for collaboration. It was a strange and deeply satisfying feeling. Henderson did try to reach out once, a few months later, via a mutual acquaintance. He wanted to clear the air, he said, maybe offer an explanation. I declined. There was nothing to clear, nothing to explain. His actions had spoken for themselves, and so had mine. I wasn't interested in his excuses or his attempts at salvaging his reputation. I was too busy building my own, on a foundation of integrity and genuine competence. I established clear boundaries. The old Sarah, the one who would silently absorb disrespect and overwork, was gone. The new Sarah demanded respect, valued her own time, and was unafraid to call out mediocrity or injustice. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted, not just in my title or my office, but within me. I finally understood my own power, and I wasn't afraid to wield it. Looking back on that whole saga, from the sting of the Napa Valley rejection to the sweet, sweet vindication in that ballroom, I realized it was never really about a company retreat. That was just the symptom, the final straw that broke the camel's back. It was about value, my value, how I allowed others to define it, and ultimately, how I reclaimed it. For years, I had operated under the misguided belief that if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down, and produced exceptional results, my worth would eventually be recognized. I learned the hard way that in some environments, particularly toxic ones, competence can be seen as a threat, and quiet dedication can be mistaken for weakness, an invitation to be exploited. The truth is, Henderson and his ilk were never going to acknowledge my contributions willingly. Their power, their sense of self-importance, was built on diminishing others, on taking credit for work that wasn't theirs. They relied on people like the old me, the Sarah who would sigh quietly and just do the extra work, the Sarah who wouldn't make waves. But that Sarah is long gone. The journey taught me that true empowerment doesn't come from external validation, though the support of allies like Mr. Peterson was invaluable. It comes from within. It comes from recognizing your own worth, investing in your own growth, and being willing to strategically and courageously fight for what you deserve. Project Phoenix wasn't just a brilliant piece of data analysis. It was my declaration of independence. It was proof that I didn't need Henderson's approval, or anyone else's, to be excellent. And the most satisfying part wasn't just seeing Henderson get his comeuppance, though I won't lie, that was incredibly gratifying. It was the realization that I had built something of undeniable value, something that spoke for itself, something they couldn't ignore or steal. My story isn't unique, unfortunately. So many of us, especially women in competitive fields, have faced similar situations, being underestimated, having our ideas dismissed, only to see them re-emerge under someone else's name, being passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified but better connected colleagues. It's a systemic issue, a frustrating reality of many workplaces. But what I want you to take away from my experience is this: you are not powerless. Your skills, your intellect, your dedication, these are your weapons. Don't let anyone dim your light or make you doubt your capabilities. Sometimes the no-budget excuse, or whatever form it takes, is a blessing in disguise. It's the push you need to stop waiting for permission and start creating your own opportunities on your own terms. It's the catalyst for your own Project Phoenix. So, what would you have done in my place? How have you navigated similar challenges in your own career? I'd genuinely love to hear your stories and your strategies in the comments below. Let's create a community here where we can support each other, share our triumphs, and remind ourselves that we are not alone in these battles. And if you found inspiration or validation in my journey, please subscribe and share this video. You never know who else might need to hear that their silent rise is not only possible, but can lead to an incredibly powerful revelation. Thank you for watching, and remember, know your worth, and then add tax.